Since the beginning of the COVID-19 lockdown and isolation rules, what education looks like in Australia and in many places around the world has changed dramatically. Students are learning from home, teachers are teaching from home, parents are supporting from home, and technology suddenly has a far greater role in education than ever before. Adam, you've been talking to lots of teachers recently. What are some of the things you've been hearing from them?
Thanks, Deb. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. I have been talking to a few teachers, and it's really interesting to hear what's been coming through. And I think one of the things I've realised is that many of the same challenges are there, and some of them are just more protracted. So whether it's being a bit more open to the criticism of parents and being able to receive that in more real time. Mischief makers will always be mischief makers, and there's new ways to make mischief when it comes to digital forums. I'm hearing quite a bit about that. When it comes to the real human and teaching side of things, I'm hearing of teachers missing a lot about that immediate feedback, the look on the face when a student actually gets what they're saying and has understood the content. There's a bit of missing that going on. I had one of the teachers say, and this is a direct quote, "I'm pretty tech savvy, and this week was probably one of the hardest weeks I've had." So, there's this protracted layer of challenges coming into the fold for teachers. We'll talk a bit about it some more in the webinar, but just this idea of where technological expertise needs to sit in the realm of teaching these days. It's quite an interesting challenge. Another direct quote that I thought was really nice. "I feel like I've gone from being a teacher to being a screenwriter, director, and actor in a one-man TV series." So some interesting insights from the teachers that I've been speaking to recently.
Great, thanks Adam. So as you can see, the changes arising under COVID have brought about a number of challenges for teachers and the Department of Education and the education ecosystem. So in today's webinar, we'll be discussing how education departments have had to change in recent times, what benefits have occurred as a result, and we're thinking about how we might perpetuate any of these benefits into the future beyond COVID-19. What's most likely to stick and what won't? We will explore some of the principles that Portable has uncovered when designing for change in education. And if you're interested in reading our report, you can download it for free on our website. You can also check out the previous webinars we've run on our website, including Accessing Justice during COVID-19. So just a quick agenda. In today's webinar, we'll cover the response to COVID right now in education and in a range of settings across Australia, the wider context of how this sits in learning, education, and the world of educators and policymakers, and the future and how education will look after the crisis. At the end of the presentation, we've reserved some time for questions, so please add your questions to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So, Peter, how are you going today and what's it like in Sydney at the moment?
It's as everyone knows, a pretty crazy time. And I think one of the things that people crave the most is the feeling of being connected. And it's kind of odd in a way that with digital, it enables this connectivity. But we still very much crave the feedback and the physicality. And I just think about what it's like to walk through Sydney, which is a city I grew up in, and literally I have been travelling to work this week because we're doing a whole bunch of co-production with the ABC around broadcast, and just incredible to watch just empty platforms and cityscapes that are literally just architecture without the humanity there. And it is quite a sort of desolate and I think quite a lonely time for a lot of people. But when you look at education, it's pretty exciting just to see what's happening and the way that teachers have really risen to the challenge.
Great. So yeah, we're really excited to hear some of those things that are happening at the moment. So you're in the middle of a crisis, and like to think about we'd like to hear some of the responses that are happening in government at the moment, and what are some of the main problems that you're trying to solve right now?
Yeah, so what's kind of interesting is this has come at a time when we're just launching a schools digital strategy and enacting that strategy. And a big part of that is what we've always worked on when it comes to digital, which is creating a connected world. So when I look at that strategy, there's kind of 4 key areas. The first key area is just connectivity. And that's about a school being connected. You know, so you can't live in a connected world unless it's always on. With this point, I'm always reminded of electricity. And when electricity was first launched, it was only available to households in the evening, and businesses got it during the day. And with the internet, remember with dial-up, you know, you had your 20 minutes in a single go. And you couldn't actually have true innovation. You can't have a refrigerator when electricity is only available, you know, for 8 hours a day. You know, it has to be available 24/7. And data's the same. And so a key area of how we've always looked at digital is to enable schools by connecting them through better data. And so we've got programs, one called Internet of the Edge, which is specifically about providing better data connectivity to schools. So that's already in play. That's one. 2 is the actual physical and digital environment of a classroom. So whether that be how we bring digital into a classroom and use digital into a classroom, you know, which could be as simple as just, you know, projection and, you know, the use of device, to how you actually create a learning environment, a virtual learning environment, and connect those well. So that's kind of 2. 3 is the content that's provided. So good educational content. And if that's delivered well, then it can work in both digital and physical worlds. But you understand that they are different teaching modes. And there's a strong component of professional learning that goes into that space. And then finally is the reporting. So that side is you know, how well the actual technology works is one side, but the other side is things like formative assessment, where, you know, how can I actually understand where that child is at any point of the day so I can better assist them. And so they're kind of like those 4 key bits. And really what's happened with COVID-19 and the current situation is that it's really escalated a lot of this work that was happening anyway. But it's definitely providing a stronger focus. And so the government response has been very much about equity. And so that equity, so you've seen a lot of things about devices going to school children, things where we're assessing a household need. And if it's, for example, a kid in year 12, you know, it is very much, you know, how you get a dongle to that household, but also how we respond to equity in other areas. So that could also just be providing print packs, which actually go to a household, or it could also be about the actual broadcast, as an example that I think everyone's heard about, the co-pro with the ABC to actually broadcast television content 5 hours a day on ABC Me. And that's about, once again, equity that goes to households. So you've seen a really solid, strong response. You've seen, like, you know, people like Telstra providing data. So a real strong sense of community and ensuring that as much as possible, the norm of life and education is such a critical part of it, and schools are so critical, that they can actually continue to exist and education continues to exist. And there is a piece of that around the fact that schools have remained open.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talked quite a bit there about how the kinds of things that you're doing for students at the moment to help them transition in this time. What are some of the things that you're currently doing for schools and teachers and the education department at the moment?
Yep. So a big part of this has been initially, so I'm now in IT as a directorate. So initially a big piece of this is ensuring that connectivity and platforms are responsive. We have unfortunately seen in other states things like their student portals go down. So one of the things that we did initially was set up a task force, set up a almost an emergency response, and ensure that things like capacity with things like Google Classroom or with Microsoft Teams could be met to, you know, so that platforms were sustainable. So that was very much key. The other piece was then ensuring that teachers had access to professional learning. So there's an area in my directorate here called Technology for Learning, with another area which is Learning in Business Systems. And they've been running a lot of virtual training. So exactly like this live stream training to really uplift PL. And we've had thousands and thousands of teachers undertake that professional learning. And it has been specifically focused on two things. One, about technology and using that technology to be comfortable with it, because like all things, you know, you need to be comfortable with it to deliver that quality. But the other side is, how do you actually teach in these virtual worlds? Because the teaching is very different, you know. So as raised before, you know, it is harder to teach when you don't have the feedback. So I know we've a couple of teachers that we've been shooting downstairs in this building. They've talked about performing lessons but not getting that feedback. So not having the students in the room. So then how do you actually engage with an audience where you may not necessarily get that immediate feedback? But the other thing is, you know, being, you know, compelled just to stay in a digital space is a very different form of teaching. And that's been key as well in terms of being able to, you know, provide that professional learning to make teachers really comfortable with that space.
It's great to hear about some of the support that is being provided for teachers at the moment, and so many huge changes within the system that are happening right now. So just to take a look at the broader context of what's going on. So we're thinking about how we can implement technology broadly and quickly. And this is something that our project team that went to Papua New Guinea really had to think about. So the schools there were trying to implement more technology in their classrooms. This is something that Adam worked on. So Adam, would you be able to talk to us about the tension between autonomy and centralisation within the school systems that came up there in Papua New Guinea, and what you learned about balancing that tension?
Yeah, thanks, Deb. It's interesting also picking up from what Peter was talking about, the different initiatives that are underway and where it placed us in PNG. And we were doing that work because of the Coral Sea cable that was forthcoming and promising to provide, I think it was 1,000-time bandwidth increase. So we were in a privileged position to be a few steps back and really be able to try and help, I guess, frame that vision for how technology may be introduced. And that tension that you're speaking about there, I think getting the balance right on that tension is crucial. I think there's probably a temptation for a lot of decision makers in the world of education to favour standardisation and uniformity and prescribed approaches. And I think there's definitely a role for that in the rollout of technologies for learning environments. But in terms of what we saw in PNG and how that tension plays out, we saw some schools forging ahead on a path with the likes of Google Classroom rollouts and their own Exchange servers on site. Even though they were part of a broader school system, they had their servers on site working. They had some of the heroes in that world of IT really working hard for that one individual school. We saw others as power users of the student administration system that was underway, and they were really blazing ahead on that front. And then we saw some schools playing catch up and using the basic technologies that were mandated and standardized from head office and trying their best just to make those work. And, you know, the Coral Sea cable wasn't connected yet, so they were on satellite connections and radio connections, really trying to make that technology-based learning work. So some of those questions that arise from that tension, should this school be allowed to venture forth with its, you know, own suite of products while this other school uses a completely different suite? What about that other school that sees those other two schools powering ahead and they're kind of hampered by the current level of technology they're at? And then that only gets more complicated when you talk about the layers of funding and how people have to report on the funding that they're trying to get and what standards they're trying to reach with that. So in an environment like that, what do leaders do? And we think at Portable that you need to really empower the people to wield technology as a tool rather than just be the subject of it. So I think that's going to come up a bit in some of the other questions we'll venture into today as well. But it's worth asking ourselves a different sort of question about which conditions need to be in place for innovation to really occur. And in our experience, I don't think that really seems to happen when innovation is mandated from a top-down approach. In our education report, we stated that schools need to foster and preserve an environment where there's willingness and freedom for teachers and students to take healthy risks. We do a lot of that in our work at Portable. That's kind of the space we always operate in. It's just that healthy sort of assessment of risk and take enough risk to learn enough to then improve what you're doing. So I think to me, that has a lot to do with that inherent tension we're speaking about. So I guess in summary, the tension's there for a reason. There's no easy answer. Tilting too far in either direction is going to hold schools back. You need enough of the guardrails in place from centralised head office, and you need enough of the innovators forging ahead and blazing a trail and having permission to fail as they go. So what really needs to exist is freedom for the right type of experimentation and constant access to the development and learning opportunities that Peter spoke to there as well, and have that really supported by a thriving and organic kind of community of practice of teachers teaching each other and educators learning from the experiences of others as well. And ultimately that environment that accepts failure and allows for iterative approaches. So I want to be clear too, it's not about adding another job description bullet point for teachers to somehow also become innovator, but you're going to have your natural innovators in that world and they're going to bring people along with them, and those communities of practice can help bring them along with them. So it's about getting those conditions right to allow them to flourish in that environment.
That's great, Adam. Is this the conditions for innovation and creating that balance between giving direction but allowing schools and teachers freedom to figure out what works for them? Is that the kind of thing that you're considering as well, Peter?
Yeah, 100%. You know, so we in New South Wales, we have a thing called and have for a long time called local schools, local decisions. And that's very much, I mean, Department of Education is outside of New York is the largest department in the world. So there's 2,400 schools, 800,000 kids entrusted in our care every single day. You know, so that's about 1.2 million sort of parents. So it's a responsibility that's big, and schools are, let's be clear, they're very much, it is a face-to-face business, like it is bricks and mortar. Digital is just an enabling capability. So it is important to give schools, and good schools always have great principles. You know, they are the guiding light. And really people need to be able to take charge, and they need to be supported though. So really what we're talking about in particular around the digital strategy and the mobilisation piece is very much being able to provide people with almost like blueprints. So almost, it's like most things, you know, you can offer people 1,000 different types of products, or you can offer people 6 products that are done really well. And then by doing that, you're able to better support that, and you're able then to create an environment where schools can actually share ideas. So for us as an example, this would be, as a school, you may use Google Classroom, or you may use a Microsoft suite. And there's certain combinations that we know work quite well. And that's about just saying, look, 80% of schools will probably work best using a few different types of product sets. And it's certainly not about dictating the product set. It's about saying, look, a school just like yourself, they're using this, but there's another school using this. You choose, but let us support you, and also let us connect you with other schools. So with someone who's potentially higher in the curve or just further along, you know, how can we create a situation where that school can mentor the other school, create a sense of collaboration, of storytelling, narrative, and therefore a better uplift in the the adoption of digital and how it is applied in the educational space. So that's very much what we're focusing on now.
Fantastic. And that narrative, that storytelling and narrative is definitely some of the things that we come across in designing different approaches as well. You mentioned that digital is seen as an enabling capability. Adam, how do you think about designing for remote digital learning, and what do we need to consider about the role of technology in education at this time?
Yeah, it flows on really nicely from some of those things Peter was talking about. And I think picking up on that point of digital and technology being wielded as a tool in the toolkit, I think, and also about the role of blueprints or frameworks and how we can help teachers with that as well. So I really love this question. It kind of lets me nerd out a little bit on some of the things we've learned from academia along our research as well. And it allows us to stand on some of those academic giants that we've learned from along with our work that we've done in the education space at Portable. So I guess it comes back to that principle that we often ground our work in the education space, and that Peter's been talking to as well, that technology is there to enable learning, not be the focus of the learning. And this is a really tricky time to get that balance right as well, right? So it was incredibly relevant in our work in PNG too. So we saw some examples and some specific examples here. We heard people asking for that silver bullet of the interactive whiteboard in the classroom as an example. But then when we were doing our design research interviews and asking how this would be used and what it would do to transform learning experiences, there was often not a lot of answers given on that front. So sometimes it's also about making sure that assumption's not there, that technology is the silver bullet or the answer, and that it needs to be backed up with the other elements of what good education looks like. So nerding out for just a sec, but I think there's two really interesting frameworks, and I'd really recommend people Google them after the webinar, and I'll only talk to them at a surface level, and I'm sure there's teachers out there that know them back to front. But I think of Mishra and Kohler's TPCK model. We love our Venn diagrams in the design world. So 3 overlapping circles in a Venn diagram. 2 of them have always been part of good teaching, right? So you've got your circle for pedagogy or the art of teaching, and you've got your circle for content or what it is that you're teaching. And good education's always been understood at the intersection of those 2 circles. And now we're in the 21st century where we're teaching via Zoom and via video conferencing. There's a 3rd circle that's become apparent, and that circle is technology and technological knowledge specifically. And so in this 21st century environment, we're starting to realize that really good education happens at this intersect of all 3 of those circles, and expertise in one is good, but expertise across the board can really help. I don't raise that as an instruction to teachers to get better at technology or to replace things with technology. I think what it also does is it allows us to understand that the pedagogy is its thing, that the art of teaching is its thing, and that you can't replace that with technology, and knowing the content is its thing. And this is a 3rd knowledge area to add into there. So a teacher with expertise in technology as a tool in their teaching toolkit is going to be an even more effective teacher in the current world. But of course, they're going to need to be a good teacher. And you know, no one ever left a school environment and said, gee, I really remember that software platform. But they do remember, I think of my year 8 English teacher, Mr. Morris. Huge influence on my life. And I don't remember what was on the iMac in the corner of the room in that English class, but I certainly remember his teaching. The second one that I think really helps teachers, I think we need to be really cognizant of what teachers are going through right now. And hopefully this is a helpful framework, is, and people have probably heard of it before, but it's the SAMA model from Dr. Ruben Fuentedera. So it has a 4-stage kind of ladder of how you bring about technology in learning experiences and be really intentional with it. And I think it brings that intentionality that's needed. So rather than just technology is either there or it's not, it's the degrees to which you transform the learning with that technology. So on that ladder, you've got S standing for substitution. I'll just use some really basic examples. It's relational, so it depends on what you had before, but you know, that's when technology directly substitutes another without a lot of functional benefits. So think of a quill and ink being replaced by a pen. Slightly better, but just a replacement for it. Then you move up the levels a little bit. You've got A that stands for augmentation, where technology makes a direct substitute with some functional benefits. So think of a pen and paper being replaced by a typewriter, for example. then you cross a threshold and you get into that area where learning experiences are transformed. And that's where you get into modification, where the actual task itself that's going on, the learning task, is modified by the introduction of technology. So in this context, I'm thinking of a typewriter being replaced by a word processor, complete with its formatting abilities and its spell checks and its automated footnotes. That really changes the task at hand. And then finally, we reach the redefinition end of that ladder, which is right at the transformational end. And that's where tasks that never existed before, learning tasks, can be invented by the introduction of technology. So if we think about those examples I've been using, where we had the model of the single writer sitting there at the desk doing their writing, we now get the collaborative document world, the Google Docs of the world, where collaborative writing can occur. So what my point really is there is not simply to aim for that R end of the scale, but to be intentional about where you're setting the technology on that scale. So substitution sometimes works, but you need to know that you're doing it in that model and you're not pretending it's something further along the scale. And it helps teachers to equip themselves with what does it look like further down that scale. I think of when we were in PNG, Deb, you were there with me, and we brought a single smartphone into a room on a data connection. And we experimented with a group of year 8, 9, 10, year 7, 8, 9, 10 kids about how they could test the earthquake shakeability of some cardboard models and how to design a better model using one smartphone with the Google Science Journal app, disconnected from the internet, using its own accelerometer built in. So it was one simple tool in that classroom, but it was a real modified learning experience. And it allowed them to really see how technology can be integrated, but that the learning didn't have a replacement as a result of that technology. So those are the things I think about when we're talking about what we need to keep in mind when we're considering the role of technology in education.
Thanks for sharing those tools, Adam, and for highlighting the different ways that technology can be brought into the classroom. Having considered these aspirational goals for technology in education, I want to turn our thinking to the gaps that have been highlighted by COVID-19 in the school system and how we can address those. So Peter, would you like to have a talk on this one?
Give me the hard question. Just kidding. Okay, so I mean, like all things when it comes to technology and digital, it always highlights inequity. And so we, one of the things that we really focus on in the Department of Education in New South Wales is looking at inequity. So for me, everything is about equity, particularly when you look at public education. So you're talking about, Sir Mark Scott, who's our secretary, who's ex-ABC. His vision is to create, the world-class, one of the leading education departments in the world, and really to provide quality education. I began my career at Royal Blind Society, and to me, that was actually in digital transcription. So it was actually about providing equity for people who are blind or vision impaired. And to do that, it was actually, in an age of print, it was actually moving in. You either went into Braille, which was incredibly time consuming. And when I kind of went into that, it was a period of disc, and that's actually like your floppy disks. And we used to transcribe books, using scanners and OCR. So there's always this kind of thing. Technology always puts barriers there, but then technology always removes them. And good government really facilitates that. So the removal of those barriers is fundamental. Here in Australia, we're pretty lucky, I think, particularly given what we're seeing in other countries at the moment. The sort of mass injections that we sort of see. So not only around the social welfare system, but even the sort of money that has been allocated to ensuring a greater equity. So we have literally spent tens and tens of millions of dollars improving data connectivity to schools. And then one of the great things that we're seeing is when you're moving into communities where as an example, the equity may not be in a household, then quite often, we're seeing these amazing stories where schools are being opened up to communities. And during, as an example, the bushfires, where kids were able to go in and then have their shower and wash in those schools, and that they become really community focused. And it is the same with data and digital. It is interesting with handsets. You can get a handset for $29 and can connect it. And so there are providers out there who have approached us to actually offer us device that that you can turn into a hotspot and actually connect. And so the focus there is, it's almost that sort of basic thing of the connectivity, which is the data and access and device. But the other piece that we've really seen a massive cohesion with is around the content and quality of content. So as schools quickly went into ramp-up mode around COVID-19, and people knew that the learning from home model would be put into place, they actually reached out. So I talked a bit about, so my secretary talking to the head of the ABC, and really they started to talk about, let's broadcast, so let's look at educational content. And almost immediately all of the states came about. So they've all been approaching the ABC, and other departments have approached us, and we've approached them. So how can we support you? How can we actually take your learning objects and our learning objects, and how can we share it, and how can we bring it together? We have a national curriculum, right? So, and we're seeing that now. So Victoria, right at the moment, Victoria is actually producing co-production content. We are, and the other states are really asking how they can be all a part of it. And so we are seeing, like, it is such an amazing sense of goodwill. And what is always remarkable at times like this is they always create the greatest sense of innovation, or the greatest necessity for innovation. I think everyone's seen that little gag that's gone around, the internal survey, corporate survey, that says, what has been had the biggest impact on your digital innovation in the company, and it's A, the CEO, B, the CIO, C, COVID-19. And that's actually true. It is completely changed and created this great sense of necessity. And I think that's important. And it's also about how we just work together and the humanity in itself.
Thanks, Peter. You shared lots of ideas there about what's working really well under COVID-19, which was really interesting. And it leads really nicely into thinking about the future and what learning is going to look like. So some of the things that you talked about were, really cheap handsets that children might have, a great quality of content that teachers are presenting, and a learning from home model. So I think it's some of the things that you can imagine in your ideal future vision for education. And has this vision been accelerated, or is it completely different to what you thought maybe 6 months ago?
It has been accelerated quite dramatically. Now, what we're seeing is that there may not always be consistency in the way that these virtual learning spaces are delivered. You're also seeing, couldn't be more proud of teachers, and in particular, I'm going to say New South Wales Department of Education teachers, and just how they've adapted and really taken the challenge, and how they've continued to deliver something quite incredible. There was an argument in the beginning where they talk about, and someone said, look, it's not necessarily online learning, it's emergency learning. But I think, and which may have been true in the beginning, but what you're actually starting to see is an adoption. Now, some parents, I think parents are probably the hardest hit with this in some ways. And I'm going to say that because I think their parents quite often have no idea what actually happens in a classroom and the level of energy that goes in. And so potentially what you are going to see is, as term 2 goes back in New South Wales and it has in other states, that parents are just literally going to go, do you know what? I am sending my kids back. So and it's come right from the Prime Minister that schools have been open. So, and they are, right? And so we're in New South Wales, similar to other states, we're taking on that rostered, phased approach to come back, which is very sensible. But I think probably the area of greatest attention potentially is parent to continue this adoption. But also we need to recognise that education is very much a face-to-face, engaged environment. And digital is another way to facilitate. But, I always am a firm believer in a sort of a hybrid approach. I noticed that Kathleen is online, and she was at the department for a while, and she ran what was essentially called Future Learning Spaces. And one of the big things about creating these learning environments is, adjusting it to different pedagogies or modes of learning. And so we've really seen, a massive evolution in physical space of how you actually transform a space into different modes. And digital is the next thing to be properly added to that. So what I really see is this ideal future is digital and physical. Digital for me is just a capability and an enabler. It's less exciting as, I guess what a lot of people refer to as phygital, the digital and the physical coming together to facilitate learning. And the ability as a result to look at things like artificial intelligence or machine learning to once again help support learning. And so really that's what I see as the benefits of what's coming about is a greater adoption because we're really being forced to. But the hope is that people will see the benefits and understand how you have a blended model where digital and physical worlds come together. And as a result, they're able to do things like better deliver formative assessment, to better understand where a child is at, and therefore either provide, whether it be a human, and sometimes even, once again, digital. So, one of the things they use in that, in our spaces with Teams, Microsoft Teams is notes. And the fact of that, there's machine learning built in that you can actually set up mathematical equations and a child can then be solving those. And then with machine learning, it actually starts to present you examples to actually work on. Now that's the kind of world that we're sort of moving towards where, you've got a human that directs, creates, facilitates, instructs, does all those sort of things that are required that map back, make sure things map back to the curriculum, understand what the outcomes are, but the technology and the digital is working in the background, and that is to provide just better support, really. It's like all things. For me, I only really notice technology when it doesn't work. So when it works well, it should just be there in the background.
It's a lovely thought that technology is there in the background for us, helping us out, facilitating learning, and bringing in things like artificial intelligence and machine learning. It's definitely looking to the future. It's an interesting way to think about that. It's not online learning at the moment, it's emergency learning, but that's starting to change. And because there's lots of questions. I can see that.
I should mention I didn't say that one, by the way.
Okay.
Someone who's quite significant said it. And, it is pretty much, it's in many ways the way it started, but, we are doing an amazing job as a country.
Yeah, absolutely. In the matter of kind of 6 to 8 weeks, having transitioned or starting to transition from that emergency learning to more systematic and planned and purposeful online learning. It's really great to hear that. So because we have so many questions, I'm going to move through into our final thoughts section. So just to touch base with you again there, Adam, if you, how do you think that this experience and the things that you know about education, how have they informed your view about how the education department of the future should operate? And how do you think that bureaucracy could be better?
What a big question, Deb. And I'm going to use some imagination here. I might even at one point try and imagine what I'd have to be saying if I was Peter's colleague or boss in the office there as well. But as you might expect, I'm probably going to take the human-centered designers approach to answering this question. So to me, it comes back to what you need to put first, what you need to ensure happens in tandem following that, and then what can wait till later. So all of our research, all of the best practice guidance, and certainly our recent work in P&G has put people first. That's always been what we've found. So what does this actually mean in practice? So really for us, it means you don't introduce technologies and hope for behaviours to change as a result of that. You don't undertake change management without the story of why and the vision for it being communicated and understood. And you don't force pedagogy, the art of teaching and how teaching occurs, to play catch up to technology either. So from our perspective, this pedagogy that I'm talking about, hopefully everyone on the call is familiar with the term, but really it is a function of a people first approach, right? So it's the art of teaching, it's the art of communicating and learning. Of course, when it's done well, it's going to be inherently people centered. So putting that little hat on to pretend what I'd be doing if I was one of the bosses at the moment, I think it's about equipping and empowering teachers to be those innovators we need for 21st century learning. We've been thrust into a very new phase of 21st century learning right now. So where is that space to experiment, to try and fail, to learn from that failure? These are the skills that are needed in the 21st century workplace. We use them at Portable on a daily basis. So how are we providing the right conditions for teachers to let these skills grow and flourish in themselves and also in the students they're teaching? And again, it comes back to professional development time that is there and it's continuous and it's supported and it needs to be meaningful. It comes back to communities of practice that are organic and passionate and self-sustaining. And people who are in the system, they need to be part of the change, not subject to it. I think it would also be remiss of me not to pick up on one of the things that's probably worth referencing. That is about how do we ensure our students are responsible digital citizens? I think that's a huge part of the mix as well. And I think of some of the work that I've seen in this space. I know Google has the Be Internet Awesome campaign with a bunch of principles to help distill that learning down about how to be a good digital citizen and how to have a good relationship with technology. And I think I'll just leave with that. I think we also need to consider what the social ramification is of technology on the students and on the teachers that we're introducing technology for.
Thanks, Adam. Peter, did you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share about how the education department of the future should operate and how bureaucracy can be better?
I would just say that to continue what we're doing now at the moment, which is a greater collaboration. So, I mean, schools are, community-based, but what we are starting to see in this digital world is the sharing of content. And I mean, what I think would be quite interesting is, if you've got, the best mathematician, rather than teaching 30 students, teaching, 70,000 students. And then, basically when I say that, I mean, that's moving towards that lecture style, but then teachers obviously supporting that. And that very much happens now in terms of that master sort of class. But I think just being open a lot more to sharing content and sharing ideas and sharing experiences. I think that's the key thing that's going to come out of right now.
I certainly hope so. Smart people sharing their ideas always has a good outcome. So I'm going to pass over to Hayley, who has been collecting your questions, everybody. Hayley, have you got a few questions that our participants have for the speakers? I think you're just muted, Hayley. Sorry.
Hello, I'm back. I've unmuted myself.
Video call bingo. I win.
Yeah, we do have quite a few questions. People, please start bringing them in. And Peter and Adam, please feel free to have a look through them. And if there's kind of any burning ones that you'd like to answer, please don't hesitate. I'm going to start with actually the first one that came in. That probably came in at about maybe the 10-minute mark, and it's from Lynn. She asks, what opportunities for transformation can we learn about and leverage from the current just the current situation? What data information do we need to collect now from teachers and students and parents to influence future policy directions? Peter, that might be a good one for you.
Yeah, a great question too. I saw this when it first came in. So really the opportunities for me in the current disruption is the greater integration of digital into the learning environment. I'm very much a firm believer, as I mentioned before, of, how do you bring digital and physical together, and how do you make that almost that seamless shift, so it's frictionless and seamless, so that people can move from physical to digital. And I believe that's the opportunity in transformation, is how we design that so it works together. So they're not separate things, they come together. And in terms of that future policy and direction, we're seeing quite a bit there now around things like devices and, data, access to data. And, there's certain things, we treat, when I'm not saying if this is right or wrong, we treat digital environments like virtual classrooms very much like a physical classroom. And so as a result, we don't allow sessions to not switch off. So, if you start a session, just like a classroom, it always needs to be supervised. So there's some really interesting debates happening now about how you transform, digital and physical. Copyright's another really interesting thing. But it is, I think, to Lynn's point, it's actually collecting that data and then feeding that into the policy machine. So, the great thing about data, if we collect it well, is it does provide us a real sense of direction.
Yeah, great. There's actually another question which now in the moment I can't find, but it was kind of asking, do we imagine it to be hybrid? Do we imagine then like schools of the future could be that they're doing it at home and at school?
Yeah, I think that would be ideal for me.
Yeah. Adam, do you have any thoughts on the first question?
Oof, on the first question, it's a big one. I think maybe it also helps maybe answer another question I saw come in, and this is again probably taking the human-centered design lens. I saw another one in there about curious to know how we see the role of students in all of this. I answered that a little bit, I guess, in terms of like responsibility to train them as good digital citizens. But there's your quantitative data, and there's also that qualitative piece. And I think as a design researcher, I often spend a fair bit of time in that qualitative landscape. So it's the same sort of stuff we focus on at Portable all the time, right? So we have to acknowledge that young people are the experts in their own school experience. It's the same sort of thinking that underpins all the co-design work that we do at Portable. And when we begin these engagements, the first thought that we have is acknowledging that the people we're partnering with are the experts in their own experience. And then the second thought is, how can we meaningfully engage with these people in order to understand their unique needs and ideas? And how do we design with them and not just for them? So one of the things that we put forward in our education report was about empowering students to not only have the means to provide recommendations and guidance, but also to empower them with the skills to do that effectively. So how do we make feedback in a learning environment a two-way street? Are we stopping to ask the students how remote lessons are working for them? Have we explored what asynchronous lessons could look like, where the teacher and student aren't necessarily needing to interact in a real time encounter? How might that be received by students? What sorts of usability testing techniques could we even bring to assessing how Google Classroom or Canvas or any of these other online classrooms or digital learning environments could be working? And I think the big one is, what are we doing about the metacognition skills, the skills that are thinking about your own thinking? So how can we empower students to really grasp that, especially in later years, and provide meaningful feedback on their own experience? I'll probably tie this up because I've obviously raised more questions than I've answered there as well, but it's again not supposed to be replacing the job teachers are doing. So they are undoubtedly the experts in the learning environments that they're creating. We don't need them to be design researchers too, but they do need to become our partners in it. So, you know, we're really looking forward to partnering with more teachers in these sorts of situations and partnering with the students they're talking to and teaching with. I think the last thing to put on this as a way to paint it as well is that a recent insight from the P&G work we did is that we're in a weird paradigm shift where teachers and students are often learning together. And what does that mean for the teacher-student relationship in this new world? And how can we provide the empowerment to students to be confident sharers of learning, even back up the tree and actually teaching their teachers how to use the technology part of that Venn diagram that I was talking about so that it unlocks the pedagogy and content parts of that diagram I spoke about earlier.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, actually. I think, I mean, there's a lot to be said, and smart teachers do it, you know, where, you know, students, particularly around technology, you know, help teach as well. And it's, you know, there was a question around university. I've lectured, I lectured for about 10 years in a tertiary level. And it is very different in that the world of digital, because the virtual learning environments, you know, that's been around for what, you know, close to 20 years in universities, and even more if you go back to the very nature of the internet and universities using it. But, you know, it's that whole kind of thing that I think digital and these worlds, they do allow for greater collaboration. And part of that is the ability, as an example, for a teacher to try something new and then to get feedback from students, whether that be actual feedback or just in behaviours.
Yeah, definitely. There was a question from Jeremy kind of around that, by his observation being a parent and also someone that works in education, is kind of that COVID is obviously highlighting how social schools are and how beneficial that is, and kind of like how might the role of schools change in that way when we go back to school. You know, will social learning be maybe a higher importance?
Yeah, I think it definitely, we like, even with the complete explosion of things like design thinking, right? So if design thinking came out in the 70s, it really didn't, you know, UX was probably becoming a really big thing, not just UI design, but proper UX design, like, you know, in the late 90s, you know, early zeros, right? But I think you know, when I went to school, it was very much a different thing. You know, it was just about rote learning. You know, critical thinking didn't really, you know, it was something more for university. And now what we're seeing is at university, it was then about collaboration and the ability to produce things. So now what we're really seeing with automation and machine learning and cognitive intelligence is the need for collaboration and then bring teams together. And that's all about social. And that's going to become fundamental, because as we see things like transport impacted, you know, like and all that automation, it is going to strip out all those mundane jobs, which in a way it should do actually. But it means that we need to be more social. We need to be more collaborative. It is the one thing that, you know, defines us as human beings.
Yeah, and I could probably pick up on that one too, Hayley, in that, yeah, I was talking about the paradigm shift for students teaching teachers. And now we've got this relationship, and someone in the chat mentioned it as a triangular relationship. So what is this paradigm now, where we've got teachers sometimes learning from students, parents sometimes having to learn from students? And I guess I just wanted to acknowledge that there's probably some nervousness from parents as well, that, you know, the pressures to play catch up on digital citizenship and good relationships with technology, and having to have that influence alongside technology being used for learning. How do you avoid the distractions, the bad behaviours in it? It's such an interesting challenge for people.
Yes, certainly. I think we have time for one more question, so I'm just very mindful of time. Is there a question in particular, Peter, that you'd like to answer?
Actually, I was just going to take one that I thought I really liked, actually.
Yeah.
It was actually around, let me see if I can find it now, though. But it was essentially just about will COVID-19 make people see the value of teaching and things like salary, etc., wherever that has gone.
I'm just up the top, and that is from Adam.
Adam, yes, Adam, yeah. So Adam, I'm like, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that would be my hope. I know, talking to parents, that the empathy and the amount of empathy that is now given to teachers is just dramatically different. It's such a essential, and we all know this, part of our community and the future of the world. And it's one of those things, not everyone can teach. We know that. You've got to be a particularly special person to really be able to connect. And so teachers are, without a doubt, one of the greatest professions that we certainly have in this country. And I truly believe that one of the good things to come out of this will be that.
Absolutely. I believe teachers are some of the greatest people in the world. So we're just going to wrap up. That is our last question that we have time for today. I'm going to quickly remind everybody that the webinar will be available on our website sometime in the next week, and we will email you all a link to it. We also have our report, Designed for Education, available to download for free on our website. And finally, thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you to Peter and to Adam for sharing your thoughts and your insights. And thanks to Hayley and to Andrew for providing technical support and assisting with the questions. I hope that everybody has a great week, and look out for the webinar on our website sometime soon. Thank you all very much.
Thanks so much.